In the early hours of March 18th, 1990, two men dressed as Boston police officers rang a side doorbell of one of America's most beloved museums, claiming they were responding to a disturbance call. What happened over the next 81 minutes remains the single largest unsolved property theft in world history, a crime that stripped a museum of masterpieces worth over $500 million, left empty frames hanging on the walls where priceless paintings once hung, and produced absolutely no arrests in over 3 decades of dedicated federal investigation. This is the story of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist and the empty frames that to this day still haunt Boston.
To understand why this specific theft became such an extraordinary, enduring mystery, you first need to understand the woman whose name the museum still carries. Isabella Stewart Gardner was a wealthy, fiercely independent Boston socialite who spent decades of her own life and considerable personal fortune assembling one of America's finest private art collections. Rather than simply displaying her paintings within a conventional gallery space, she built an entire elaborate Venetian-style palace in the heart of Boston specifically to house them, opening it to the public in 1903 with the explicit condition that the collection would remain permanently, precisely arranged, exactly as she herself had originally personally curated it.
That specific condition, written directly into Gardner's own will, remains legally binding even today. If any object within the museum's permanent collection is ever removed or significantly rearranged, the museum's entire remaining collection must, by strict legal and contractual requirement, be sold off entirely. This unusual, deeply personal stipulation explains one of the heist's most genuinely haunting, visually striking details. The empty frames that once held the stolen masterpieces still hang directly on the museum's walls today, exactly where the actual paintings themselves once hung, serving as permanent, silent, physical reminders of precisely what was lost on that single extraordinary night back in March of 1990. The collection Gardner assembled was genuinely extraordinary by any measure, featuring significant, important works by some of history's most celebrated and valuable artists. Among the paintings ultimately stolen were 3 works by Rembrandt, including his only known seascape, along with a Vermeer, one of only 34 confirmed surviving paintings by the Dutch master anywhere in the entire world. The thieves also took works by Monet and Degas, along with a bronze eagle finial and an ancient Chinese ceremonial beaker. In total, 13 separate objects were stolen that night, works whose combined estimated value has since grown to somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion.
The theft itself began just after 1 in the morning, during the tail end of Boston's traditional St. Patrick's Day celebrations, a night when the city's streets remained genuinely busy and its police force stretched considerably thin across numerous simultaneous calls. 2 men, dressed convincingly in official Boston police uniforms, approached the museum's Palace Road side entrance, telling the 2 young security guards on overnight duty that they were responding to a reported disturbance and needed to be let inside immediately. This specific detail, choosing a night when a legitimate police presence near the museum would seem entirely unremarkable and expected, reveals genuinely careful, deliberate advance planning, rather than any simple opportunistic crime of chance.
The overnight security guard on duty that particular night, a 23-year-old named Rick Abath, made a decision that has haunted both him personally and the entire subsequent investigation for well over 3 decades. Museum security protocol at the time explicitly stated that the night doors should never be opened for anyone, police officers included, without first verifying their identity and specific purpose through the museum's own direct central alarm monitoring station. Abath, believing he was speaking with genuine, legitimate Boston police officers responding to an actual reported emergency, buzzed the 2 men directly inside the building, a single decision that would ultimately enable the greatest unsolved art theft in recorded history. Once inside, The two fake officers informed Abath that he matched the physical description of a wanted individual and instructed him to step away from his security desk for questioning. Abath complied, and within moments, the two men had handcuffed both him and his fellow security guard, ultimately binding them with duct tape and leaving them separately restrained in the museum's basement, far away from any possible security cameras, alarm systems, or exterior windows through which passers-by might notice something genuinely amiss. The two young security guards would remain restrained in that basement for the entire duration of the theft, utterly unable to see, hear, or meaningfully report what was actually happening upstairs. With both guards fully secured and completely isolated, the thieves then had unrestricted, complete access to the entire museum for approximately 81 uninterrupted minutes, moving with a level of deliberate calm and confidence that investigators have since found genuinely remarkable. They didn't rush frantically from room to room. Security footage and later physical evidence suggest a methodical, unhurried approach, spending considerable individual time within specific galleries, carefully selecting particular works while conspicuously leaving others, seemingly equally valuable pieces, entirely untouched. This specific selectivity, choosing certain particular masterpieces while deliberately ignoring others of comparable or even greater individual value, remains one of the case's most genuinely puzzling, still thoroughly unexplained central details. The thieves' first major target was the Dutch Room, home to Vermeer's The Concert, widely considered one of the most valuable paintings in the entire world, given the artist's extraordinarily limited surviving body of work. They also removed Rembrandt's Storm on the Sea of Galilee, his only known seascape, along with his smaller self-portrait etching and A Lady and Gentleman in Black. Rather than carefully removing these paintings from their protective frames using proper conservation techniques, the thieves crudely cut several canvases directly out of their frames, a genuinely reckless, damaging approach that horrified art conservators, and directly suggested these particular thieves possessed considerably more raw criminal audacity than genuine specialized fine art expertise. This specific detail, the crude, damaging manner in which several paintings were physically cut from their frames rather than carefully, properly removed, has become genuinely central to ongoing theories regarding the thieves' actual underlying motive and true professional background. Skilled, knowledgeable art thieves working specifically on behalf of a genuine private collector would typically exercise considerably greater physical care to preserve a stolen painting's condition and corresponding resale value. The rough, hasty cutting observed at the Gardner suggested instead either considerable time pressure, a genuine lack of specialized fine art expertise, or possibly an entirely different underlying motive altogether, one having comparatively little to do with the painting's actual individual artistic or aesthetic value. The thieves then moved into the museum's short gallery, where they took 5 additional Degas sketches, along with a distinctive bronze eagle finial that had originally topped a Napoleonic flag. Investigators have long puzzled over this particular selection. Why steal several relatively modest Degas works on paper, pieces genuinely valuable but hardly comparable in overall significance to a Vermeer or Rembrandt, while simultaneously leaving behind other significantly more prominent, arguably more recognizable paintings elsewhere within the very same room? This seemingly inconsistent, genuinely puzzling pattern of selection has fueled decades of ongoing speculation regarding whether the thieves were working from a specific predetermined list or instead simply grabbing whatever objects happened to catch their immediate attention. Perhaps the single most genuinely bizarre theft of the entire evening occurred in the museum's Blue Room, where the thieves took Manet's Chez Tortoni, a relatively modest-sized portrait. Remarkably, security footage later confirmed this particular painting was stolen from an entirely separate room from where the alarm system had initially been triggered, and its theft was never actually captured on any of the museum's existing surveillance cameras. This specific, genuinely strange anomaly has led some researchers to speculate that a third individual, someone whose actual physical presence inside the museum has never been definitively confirmed or fully explained by any conclusive existing evidence, may have participated directly in the overall theft that particular night. While Rembrandt, Vermeer, Monet, and Degas naturally dominate most subsequent popular discussion of the case, the thieves also took a considerably less obviously valuable object, an ancient Chinese bronze ceremonial beaker known as a gu, dating back to the Shang dynasty. This particular item's specific inclusion among the stolen objects genuinely puzzles many researchers, since it stands in stark, obvious contrast to the primarily European artistic focus of virtually everything else taken that same night. Some theorists argue this specific, seemingly incongruous selection suggests the thieves were operating from a very deliberate, prearranged shopping list compiled by someone else entirely, a mysterious, still unidentified buyer with genuinely eclectic, considerably broader collecting interests than fine European paintings alone. By approximately 2:45 in the morning, the thieves had completed their selections and made 2 separate trips out to their vehicle, carrying the stolen artwork with them. Before finally departing the scene entirely, they returned briefly to the basement where the 2 restrained security guards remained bound, informing them, with what later witness testimony described as genuinely unsettling calm and casual confidence, that they would eventually be found. The thieves then simply walked out through the same side door they had originally entered, disappearing directly into the pre-dawn Boston darkness with over $500 million in stolen art, never to be definitively, conclusively identified by investigators in the more than 3 decades that have since followed. The 2 security guards remained restrained in that museum basement for several additional hours, finally freed only when the morning shift arrived for their regularly scheduled workday, and immediately discovered both men bound and utterly unable to explain what had actually happened during the overnight hours. Museum staff quickly realized the full, catastrophic scale of what had occurred, walking through galleries now containing conspicuously empty frames where treasured masterpieces had hung just hours earlier. Boston police and the FBI were both notified almost immediately, launching what would ultimately become one of the largest, longest, and most extensively resourced art theft investigations in the entire recorded history of American law enforcement. Investigators faced an immediately confusing, deeply frustrating central problem. The entire crime had apparently been meticulously planned in careful advance, yet several specific individual decisions made by the thieves themselves seemed genuinely, inexplicably amateurish. Why would professional art thieves, capable of successfully disabling a museum's motion detection sensors and confidently impersonating actual police officers, then proceed to crudely, carelessly cut priceless paintings directly out of their protective frames, potentially damaging pieces that were, by any reasonable measure, worth an absolute fortune on the international art market? This genuinely puzzling, seemingly contradictory combination of sophisticated advanced planning alongside careless physical execution would come to define nearly every subsequent theory investigators eventually developed regarding the thieves' true underlying identity and specific motive. One of the earliest and most persistent investigative theories centered directly on organized crime, specifically the Boston area's own well-documented, historically active criminal underworld. Investigators noted that stolen fine art, while genuinely difficult to openly sell through any conventional, legitimate market given its widespread public recognition, has long served organized crime networks as valuable underground collateral, frequently used to secure loans, negotiate reduced criminal sentences, or facilitate other illegal transactions entirely separate from any actual legitimate art market sale outright. Several individuals with documented, established connections to New England's organized crime networks were investigated extensively over the following years, though none was ever formally charged in direct connection with the actual Gardner theft itself. Among the earliest, most closely investigated suspects was Miles Connor Jr., a genuinely notorious art thief, already well known to Boston authorities for several previous documented art heists throughout the region. Connor happened to be incarcerated at the exact time of the actual Gardner theft, which meant he personally could not have directly, physically participated in the crime itself. However, investigators theorized he may have helped plan the theft remotely from prison, or alternatively provided direct guidance to other criminal associates regarding specifically which paintings would prove most genuinely valuable and desirable to eventually sell. Connor himself always publicly denied any direct personal involvement, though he readily acknowledged having extensive, detailed knowledge of the broader criminal underworld surrounding stolen art more generally. Another significant, closely investigated suspect was Robert Guarente, a Boston-area criminal with documented, established connections to organized crime circles operating extensively throughout both Massachusetts and neighboring Maine. Following Guarente's own eventual death in 2004, his widow later told FBI investigators that her late husband had personally possessed at least some of the stolen Gardner paintings at various points, and that he had reportedly transferred them directly to another specific individual before his own death. This particular lead represented one of the single most promising developments in the entire decades-long investigation, though it ultimately failed to conclusively lead investigators back to the actual stolen artwork itself, or to any definitive formal criminal charges being filed against anyone specifically involved. That individual identified by Guarente's widow was Robert Gentile, an elderly Connecticut man with his own well-documented history of organized crime connections dating back several decades. FBI agents raided Gentile's Connecticut home multiple times over the following years, employing ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs specifically trained to detect both human remains and, notably, materials commonly used in fine art preservation and storage. Despite these extensive, repeated investigative efforts, no stolen artwork was ever actually recovered from Gentile's property. Gentile himself consistently, repeatedly denied any direct knowledge of the stolen painting's actual whereabouts, maintaining his complete personal innocence until his own eventual death in 2021, taking whatever specific knowledge he may have genuinely possessed permanently with him. The FBI's own official, publicly stated position, formally announced in 2013, represented a genuinely significant, notable breakthrough after more than 2 decades of largely fruitless, frustrating investigation. Federal investigators announced they had identified the specific criminal organization responsible for the theft, connecting it directly to a regional criminal network operating extensively throughout the Mid-Atlantic and New England states during the specific period surrounding 1990. According to the FBI's own official account, the stolen paintings had reportedly been transported to Connecticut and Pennsylvania in the years immediately following the theft, with at least some attempted sale efforts made in the Philadelphia area during the mid-1990s before that specific trail ultimately went completely, permanently cold. Despite this significant announced breakthrough regarding the identity of the responsible criminal network, the FBI notably stopped short of publicly naming any specific living individual suspects, citing the fact that several key figures believed directly connected to the crime had already died in the intervening years since 1990. This left investigators in a genuinely frustrating position, possessing reasonable overall confidence regarding the general criminal network responsible for the theft, while still lacking sufficient definitive, conclusive evidence to formally charge any specific surviving individual, and perhaps most critically and disappointingly of all, still possessing absolutely no confirmed knowledge whatsoever regarding the stolen painting's actual current physical location or present ongoing condition after so many years. The statute of limitations for the actual theft itself expired years ago, meaning that even if investigators were to definitively identify the original individual thieves today, criminal prosecution specifically for the original 1990 robbery would no longer legally be possible. However, anyone found to be knowingly possessing or actively trafficking the stolen artwork could still face very serious, substantial federal criminal charges even today, an important legal distinction that continues to genuinely complicate any potential path toward the painting's eventual safe recovery. Whoever may currently possess the stolen artwork faces a genuinely difficult practical dilemma. The paintings remain essentially impossible to openly sell through any conventional, legitimate market, yet returning them voluntarily still risks very serious potential criminal prosecution under current existing federal law. This complex, genuinely difficult legal reality directly shapes the very reward structure the Gardner Museum has consistently offered for the stolen artwork's safe, successful return over the years. The museum has offered a $10 million reward, one of the largest private rewards in recorded history for stolen property, specifically for information leading directly to the artwork's safe, confirmed recovery. Crucially, the museum has also repeatedly, publicly stated it will not require the involved parties to actually identify themselves, effectively offering a genuine no-questions-asked pathway specifically designed to encourage anyone currently in possession of the stolen paintings to return them safely without necessarily having to risk facing formal criminal prosecution for their own personal knowledge of or direct involvement in the theft. Despite this considerable, substantial financial incentive, no credible, verifiable claim has ever successfully led to the recovery of even a single one of the 13 stolen objects. Museum Security Director Anthony Amore has personally spent well over a decade of his own dedicated professional career actively pursuing thousands of individual tips, leads, and reported sightings from around the entire world, following up on everything from genuinely credible law enforcement intelligence to considerably more dubious claims involving psychics, self-proclaimed treasure hunters, and individuals hoping to claim the substantial reward money through entirely fabricated information. Each and every promising lead, without exception, has ultimately, disappointingly, led back to the exact same frustrating dead end that has genuinely defined this entire case since its very beginning. Amore and his fellow dedicated investigators have specifically focused considerable ongoing attention on the theory that the stolen paintings remain hidden somewhere in relatively close geographic proximity to Boston itself, reasoning that moving genuinely famous, easily recognizable stolen artwork across significant distances would meaningfully increase the practical risk of eventual accidental discovery or exposure. This particular working theory suggests the paintings may still be hidden today within a basement, an attic, or some other similarly unremarkable storage location somewhere throughout New England, their true considerable significance and value entirely unknown or unappreciated by whoever may currently unknowingly possess them, having potentially inherited them entirely unaware through a relative's estate, without ever fully, genuinely understanding precisely what they actually currently have in their own possession. This particular possibility, that the world's most valuable stolen paintings might currently be sitting entirely forgotten in someone's ordinary attic or basement, their true significance genuinely unknown even to their own current possessor, adds a genuinely unique, distinctly unsettling dimension to this specific case that meaningfully distinguishes it from many other prominent unsolved historical art thefts. Unlike considerably more dramatic theories involving international criminal masterminds or secretive private collectors deliberately keeping stolen masterpieces hidden away purely for their own personal viewing enjoyment, this particular more mundane possibility suggests the actual solution to this decades-old mystery might ultimately prove almost disappointingly simple. Someone, somewhere, genuinely doesn't fully realize precisely what they currently actually have quietly sitting inside their own home. The empty frames, still hanging today within the Gardner Museum's permanent galleries, serve as a genuinely powerful, deliberate curatorial choice on the museum's own part. Rather than filling the noticeable gaps with other available replacement artwork, or simply removing the empty frames entirely from public view, museum administrators made an explicit, deliberate decision to leave them hanging precisely as they originally, historically were, serving as permanent, visible reminders of both the genuine, ongoing loss and the museum's continued, unwavering hope for the stolen artwork's eventual, successful recovery. Visitors today can still walk directly through the Dutch Room and see the exact, precise empty space where Vermeer's The Concert once hung, a genuinely haunting, deliberate physical testament to more than 3 decades of ongoing, unresolved mystery. Isabella Stewart Gardner's own original will, the very same legal document that requires her collection to remain permanently, precisely arranged, exactly as she originally curated it, has proven both a genuine curatorial blessing and a considerable practical curse throughout this entire prolonged ordeal. It has ensured the empty frames remain permanently visible today as a powerful, lasting testament to what was genuinely lost that fateful night. But it has also meant the museum cannot legally acquire replacement artwork to meaningfully fill those same specific gaps without risking the potential forced sale of its entire remaining collection, permanently freezing the museum's overall physical appearance in a state of ongoing visible incompleteness that directly, continuously reflects the theft's lasting, unresolved impact even more than 3 decades later. Over the years, numerous individual amateur investigators, dedicated true crime enthusiasts, and even several credentialed professional journalists have proposed their own distinct, competing theories regarding the actual identity of the original 1990 thieves. One particularly persistent theory centers specifically on Whitey Bulger, the infamous, notorious Boston organized crime boss who controlled much of the city's broader criminal underworld during the exact period surrounding the theft. Proponents of this specific theory argue Bulger's own extensive criminal network possessed both the necessary sophisticated planning capability and the broader underworld connections genuinely required to successfully execute and subsequently discreetly hide such an enormously valuable, high-profile theft for so many following continuous years. However, other researchers studying the case have specifically noted that Bulger himself, during his own eventual capture and lengthy subsequent criminal trial many years later, was directly questioned regarding any possible personal knowledge of the Gardner theft, and he consistently, repeatedly denied any direct involvement or specific knowledge whatsoever. Whether Bulger's specific denial should be considered genuinely credible, given his own extensive, well-documented history of criminal deception, or whether it should be taken at face value as reasonably truthful, remains yet another significant, unresolved point of considerable ongoing debate among researchers, journalists, and dedicated investigators who continue actively studying this genuinely complex case, even today, more than 3 full decades after the original theft itself. A separate, alternative theory proposes the theft may have actually been directly connected to the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, which maintained well-documented, established fundraising and weapon smuggling connections throughout the greater Boston area during the exact period surrounding 1990. Proponents of this particular theory suggest the stolen artwork may have originally been intended for direct use as valuable underground collateral, specifically to help finance ongoing paramilitary activity throughout Northern Ireland. This theory gained genuine additional credibility, partly because of a separate, well-documented 1986 theft of Vermeer's lady writing a letter with her maid from a private Irish estate, a theft definitively, conclusively linked directly to IRA operative Martin Cahill, demonstrating a genuine established historical precedent for exactly this specific kind of politically motivated fine art theft. The specific connection to Ireland gained further additional momentum when investigators noted that one of the original security guards on duty during the actual Gardner theft, Rick Abath, had at least some limited personal familiarity with individuals connected to Boston's broader Irish-American community. This particular detail led some investigators and independent researchers to seriously question whether Abath himself might have played a considerably more active, deliberate role in facilitating the actual theft than his own original, initial witness statements had suggested. Abath himself has consistently, repeatedly denied any direct personal involvement over the many following years, though his specific decision to buzz the fake officers inside without proper verification has understandably remained a persistent, significant source of ongoing scrutiny and continued investigative suspicion throughout the case's entire history. Adding yet further genuine complexity to Abbeth's own particular role within this case, museum security footage from that same specific night reportedly shows him opening one of the museum's side doors briefly, entirely on his own, approximately 20 minutes before the two fake police officers ever actually arrived at the museum's front entrance. Abbeth has consistently explained this specific incident as a routine, entirely unremarkable part of his regular nightly security rounds. However, this particular detail has fueled persistent speculation regarding whether the door may have deliberately been left unlocked in advance, potentially, though certainly not necessarily, suggesting some form of genuine inside knowledge or even direct assistance provided to the thieves before they ever actually formally arrived and rang the museum's front doorbell. It's genuinely important to note, in complete fairness, that Abbeth has never once been formally charged with any crime whatsoever in direct connection with the Gardner theft, and he has consistently, repeatedly cooperated extensively with investigators throughout the many years since the original 1990 incident occurred. Living for decades under a considerable, persistent cloud of ongoing public suspicion, despite never once actually being formally charged with any specific crime, represents its own particular, genuinely difficult personal burden, one Abbeth has publicly discussed at some meaningful length in various subsequent interviews conducted over the years, describing the genuinely surreal, deeply unsettling experience of remaining a permanent primary suspect in one of history's most famous, widely publicized unsolved crimes, despite the complete, total absence of any definitive, conclusive formal evidence ever directly implicating him. Beyond organized crime and paramilitary funding theories, some researchers have proposed an entirely different, alternative explanation altogether, that the Gardner theft was specifically commissioned directly by a genuinely wealthy, secretive private collector, someone with more than sufficient financial resources to pay skilled criminals for a very specific, predetermined shopping list of particular desired artwork, intending to keep the stolen masterpieces permanently, privately hidden away purely for their own personal viewing enjoyment, rather than for any eventual conventional resale. This particular theory, while genuinely dramatic and certainly compelling as pure narrative, lacks any definitive, conclusive supporting evidence, though it does help explain the specific, seemingly inconsistent selection of certain particular objects over other seemingly comparably valuable pieces that were conspicuously, deliberately left entirely untouched. Art crime experts studying this specific case generally note that the wealthy, secretive collector theory, while genuinely popular within broader mainstream popular culture and frequently featured prominently in various fictional heist films, remains statistically considerably rarer in documented reality than more common criminal motives, such as using stolen artwork as underground collateral, or alternatively, simply as leverage, specifically to negotiate reduced criminal sentences. Most genuinely successful, high-value art thefts throughout history, according to available expert analysis, are ultimately driven considerably more by pure practical criminal opportunity and immediate financial necessity than by any genuine, deep appreciation for the artwork's actual individual aesthetic or cultural value, a sobering, somewhat deflating reality that stands in fairly stark contrast to popular Hollywood-style depictions of genuinely sophisticated, culturally refined art thieves. The Gardner Museum theft has also meaningfully, significantly transformed broader museum security practices across the entire country in the more than 3 decades that have since followed. Museums nationwide substantially reevaluated their own overnight security protocols, specifically ending the once common practice of unquestioningly admitting individuals claiming legitimate police authority without proper independent verification. Modern museum security now typically incorporates multiple redundant layers of verification direct alarm system integration, and genuinely improved communication protocols specifically designed with the Gardner case's own documented, well-known specific vulnerabilities directly, explicitly in mind. In this particular sense, much like the D.B. Cooper case's own lasting, significant impact on aviation security more broadly, the Gardner theft has left a genuinely permanent, measurable, and lasting legacy across an entire industry's fundamental security infrastructure and standard operating procedures.
Anthony Amore, the museum's dedicated security director, has continued actively, tirelessly pursuing this specific case for well over a decade of his own professional career, describing it publicly as considerably less an unsolvable, hopeless mystery, and instead, more accurately, as a genuinely challenging, ongoing investigative puzzle that simply hasn't yet been fully, completely solved through the available evidence and resources at hand. He has personally traveled extensively across the globe, following up on individual tips, has co-authored a detailed book specifically examining the case, and consistently maintains genuine, well-reasoned optimism that the stolen paintings, assuming they haven't somehow been accidentally destroyed over the years, likely still exist somewhere and could genuinely, realistically still be recovered given sufficient time, continued dedicated effort, and a bit of eventual much-needed investigative luck. One particularly haunting, genuinely difficult possibility that Amore and other dedicated investigators have had to seriously, carefully consider involves the painting's actual current physical condition, assuming they have indeed managed to genuinely survive intact somewhere over more than 3 decades since the original theft. Fine art canvases require genuinely careful, controlled environmental conditions, specific stable temperature and humidity levels, to avoid gradual but serious physical deterioration over time. If the stolen paintings have been improperly stored for over 30 years, perhaps hidden away inside a damp basement or an unclimate-controlled attic somewhere, they may have already sustained genuinely significant, potentially irreversible physical damage, regardless of whatever their original, considerable individual market value might have been at the specific, precise moment they were originally initially stolen back in 1990. This genuinely sobering possibility adds real, legitimate urgency to the museum's continued, ongoing search efforts. Every additional year that passes without the stolen artwork's successful recovery meaningfully increases the practical risk that the paintings, even if they are somehow eventually located and definitively recovered, may no longer remain in their original, genuinely pristine artistic condition. This specific consideration has led the museum to consistently, repeatedly emphasize that its $10 million reward offer applies specifically and exclusively to the artwork's safe, successful return, regardless of its precise current physical condition, reflecting a genuine institutional recognition that even meaningfully damaged, imperfect masterpieces would still represent an absolutely enormous, invaluable act of cultural preservation and recovery after so many years of complete, total absence and uncertainty. The FBI's own official art crime team, established considerably later in 2004, partly in direct, explicit response to the ongoing lessons learned from cases exactly like the unresolved Gardner theft, now maintains a dedicated national stolen art file specifically tracking thousands of individual missing cultural artifacts and artworks from around the entire world. The 13 objects originally stolen from the Gardner Museum remain among the absolute highest priority active entries within this extensive federal database, and specialized agents specifically assigned to actively investigate international art crime continue periodically, regularly following up on any new promising leads that emerge regarding the case, even now, well over 3 full decades after the original 1990 theft first initially occurred. International art theft databases and specialized recovery organizations, including the well-established Art Loss Register based in London, also maintain their own detailed, comprehensive records specifically documenting the stolen Gardner artwork,
actively assisting reputable auction houses, galleries, and private art dealers worldwide in identifying and immediately flagging any of the specific stolen pieces should they ever genuinely resurface anywhere on the legitimate international art market. This global, coordinated monitoring network genuinely, meaningfully increases the practical difficulty of ever successfully selling the stolen artwork through any conventional, legitimate commercial channel, reinforcing the broader theory that the paintings, if they do indeed genuinely still exist somewhere today, most likely remain hidden away in private, entirely off-market storage, rather than being actively, openly traded within any recognized legitimate art market whatsoever. The Gardner theft has also inspired an extraordinary volume of dedicated popular media attention over the more than 3 decades since it originally occurred, including multiple detailed documentaries, an entire dedicated podcast series produced by Netflix, and countless individual investigative articles published by major national and international news outlets. This considerable, sustained, ongoing public interest has helped keep the case genuinely, actively alive within broader popular cultural consciousness, occasionally generating fresh, promising leads directly from members of the general public who happen to recall some genuinely relevant, previously unreported detail after watching a documentary or reading a detailed magazine article about the still unsolved case many years after the fact. Yet, despite this extraordinary, sustained combination of substantial, dedicated federal investigative resources, a genuinely enormous $10 million financial reward, and decades of considerable, ongoing, sustained public interest and attention, the fundamental core mystery genuinely remains entirely, completely unsolved. No one has ever been formally, conclusively charged with the original crime itself. Not a single one of the 13 stolen objects has ever actually been definitively, physically recovered. And the true, complete identity of the 2 men who calmly walked directly into the Gardner Museum, dressed convincingly as police officers on that particular March night back in 1990, remains even today genuinely, completely unknown to investigators and researchers alike. What makes the Gardner heist so genuinely distinct from many other prominent unsolved historical crimes is this specific, unusual combination of remarkably meticulous advanced planning alongside simultaneously careless, hasty physical execution, a fundamentally inherent contradiction that has genuinely confounded professional investigators for well over 3 full decades now. The thieves clearly, demonstrably, understood precisely how to successfully disable the museum's security systems and confidently, convincingly impersonate genuine law enforcement officers. Yet they simultaneously handled priceless, irreplaceable masterpieces with a level of genuine carelessness that would have made any professional, knowledgeable art thief specifically trained and experienced in fine art handling genuinely, visibly cringe. This puzzling, seemingly inherent contradiction lies directly at the very heart of why this specific case has proven so genuinely, remarkably difficult to fully, definitively solve. For the Gardner Museum itself, the ongoing search for its own stolen masterpieces has become deeply, permanently woven directly into its fundamental institutional identity and daily operations. Staff members regularly, actively field new tips from members of the public. The museum maintains a dedicated section of its own official website specifically devoted to the theft. And those same empty frames, deliberately, permanently left hanging exactly as they originally were found on that fateful morning back in March of 1990, continue silently welcoming curious visitors from around the entire world, each one hoping, in their own personal way, that they might somehow be the person who finally helps solve history's single greatest, most enduring, unsolved art mystery once and for all. The stolen artwork's genuinely enormous, staggering estimated value, potentially exceeding $1 billion according to certain more recent, updated appraisals, reflects considerably more than simple individual artistic merit alone. It reflects the fundamentally irreplaceable nature of, specifically, Vermeer's extraordinarily limited surviving body of work,
The genuinely singular, unique significance of Rembrandt's only known seascape painting, and the deep, considerable cultural importance Isabella Stewart Gardner herself originally placed on assembling and carefully, thoughtfully arranging her own personal collection for the specific, lasting benefit of the broader general public. Every single year these particular pieces remain genuinely missing represents not merely a straightforward, simple financial loss, but a real, ongoing cultural loss experienced collectively by every single visitor who will never actually get the chance to personally, genuinely see these specific, irreplaceable masterpieces in real, physical person. Investigators, researchers, and dedicated true crime enthusiasts continue actively, genuinely debating which specific individual theory, whether organized crime, paramilitary IRA funding, a genuinely secretive private collector, or some entirely different combination of these various competing explanations, most accurately, convincingly explains precisely what actually happened during those particular 81 fateful minutes back in March of 1990. What remains genuinely certain, however, is this. Somewhere, whether carefully hidden away inside a forgotten New England attic, tucked securely within some criminal network's private underground storage, or perhaps even sitting entirely unrecognized inside someone's completely ordinary, unremarkable home, 13 genuinely priceless masterpieces, created by some of history's absolute greatest artists, remain hidden, waiting patiently for someone, somewhere, to finally, eventually, bring them safely back home again. Perhaps the single greatest, most enduring lesson of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist isn't found within any one specific competing theory, but rather within what those permanently empty frames themselves continue to silently represent, even now, more than 3 full decades later. Isabella Stewart Gardner spent her entire adult lifetime carefully assembling genuine beauty specifically for others to freely enjoy and appreciate. 2 men, in a mere 81 calculated minutes, stripped a meaningful portion of that same beauty directly away, vanishing completely into the pre-dawn Boston darkness without leaving behind a single definitive, conclusive trace. The paintings may still exist somewhere out there today, or they may not. But until they are finally, someday, truly found, those empty frames will continue quietly hanging exactly where they've always been, patiently waiting. If you are a hunter, subscribe and join the hunt. Before you go, thank you for staying until the very end. In a world of endless scrolling and short attention spans, you chose to spend this time exploring real human stories. That means more than you know. If these stories moved you, made you think, or helped you see the world a little differently, please subscribe and turn on notifications. It's the best way to support this channel and make sure more stories like these continue to be told. And if one of these stories stayed with you after the video ended, share it with someone you care about. One message, one repost can help these voices reach someone who needs to hear them. Leave a comment and tell me which story touched you the most. I read every one. Thank you for your time, your curiosity, and your heart. I'll see you in the next story. If you are a hunter, subscribe and join the hunt.